episode of Dskate presents Game Time, we sit down with Aaron Kowalski, athlete himself living with type 1 diabetes. Aaron is the President and Chief Executive Officer at JDRF International. Enjoy.
I'm Dr. Aaron Kowalski. I'm JDRF's President and CEO. My connection to type 1 diabetes is my brother Steve was diagnosed when he was 3 in 1977, and then I was diagnosed when I was 13. Here I am now working at JDRF and trying to drive towards cures and trying to set a good example of living a healthy life with diabetes.
How and why did you get into sport?
Yeah, getting into sports for my brother and me were important because we just loved sports growing up. And at least for me, given I was diagnosed when I was 13, I was playing a lot of sports before having diabetes. Steve was diagnosed when he was 3, so that's not the case. But I think the best advice my parents gave both of us, and I've said this many times, but I think it's really important, was you'll do anything your friends is doing more. And they said it may be harder, you may have to work harder, and you can imagine back then the treatments were a lot different, but we did it. And we played, I played at the time basketball and baseball and golf growing up. My brother Steve was a really good basketball player. And that just started us off on being athletic and being parts of teams and competing. And it was not easy back then with old insulin and test strips and stuff, but we did it. And I think it's really a testament to both of us now still being very healthy today, many years later.
Yeah, I can't speak of that, but definitely even when I was a kid, you know, we just had test strips and it was a lot harder. Whereas today you have amazing technology that can just augment your game so much. How do you and your brother manage now training with your diabetes?
Yeah, so our sports have changed a little bit. You mentioned I love hockey. Pre-COVID was skating at least twice a week, and I run a lot. And now COVID, I'm running even more. My brother Steve, he cycles a lot, and I think, you know, of course, there's so much that goes into exercising with diabetes. I was fortunate to work with another Canadian friend, Dr. Mike Riddell, a lot on the JDRF Peak program, which was focused on better understanding different forms of exercise and how they affect blood sugar. And that's a big, you know, I think there's a foundation that you work from, and then there's experience. And I often try to tell people that it's both. You're not always going to get it right, but if you start with some of the fundamentals, it makes it easier.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm fortunate. Shout out to Mike Riddell and Desi Zahara and Jane Yardley, because I basically, my sports endeavors have significantly increased by taking that research and translating it into the clinical practice, and then that experience as well. How differently do you approach your hockey versus your aerobic running?
It's a great question. And I think my number one thing that I'm always thinking about when I'm exercising, and I always tell people, is my number one thought is insulin on board. Insulin on board, insulin on board, insulin on board. Now, this is really a testament to the technology and where we are right now, because most of my hockey, at least over the last 2 years or so, is early morning hockey. I play in a game that's the same group of people for the last, 20 years or so. And it's high paced and it's fun and it's fast and it's good. But the point being, I'm starting, given I'm on a hybrid closed loop, with a good number almost every time. And generally a low amount of insulin on board. So I'm generally going early morning hockey and not doing much. I actually take my pump off when I skate. These games are generally about 90 minutes. I may top up a little insulin in between. I will have snacks on hand. I generally won't eat a meal beforehand because I don't want to take insulin to have insulin on board, so I'm coming down. My biggest issue with hockey is afterwards. and having low insulin on board and being hungry after the hockey. And we can talk about how I deal with that. On the running side of the equation, again, it's to me a lot about insulin on board, but I still do worry about dropping more given the hockey is more interval to light exercise exertion versus long aerobic exertion for running. And generally with the running, I will be keeping snacks on hand. And then the last bit is I wear a CGM. And the CGM helps make sure that if I missed something or if I got it wrong or if I misinterpreted, that I keep an eye on where I'm headed.
That's such great advice. Thank you so much. Growing up, did you or still do you have any athletic role models?
Yeah, it's funny. I guess you could say athletic role models or T1D athletic role models. I mean, growing up, I had different. Mario Lemieux was by far my favorite role model for any athlete, and I still worship the ground he walks on. I've been fortunate through JDRF to meet him twice, which is like kind of the thrill of my life. So from a hockey perspective, it was certainly Mario. I played competitive golf in high school, and there was a T1D golfer, Scott Verplank, who was a role model to me. There weren't back then. It was harder to find T1D athletes, much different than today, where we have a number of like Max Domi, like my friend Max, who's just amazing, like these amazing Uber athletes. So I guess I have my non-diabetes folks like Mario Lemieux, or when I was a kid, Greg Norman, the golfer. Scott Verplank was the one T1D'er I knew that I always looked up to.
That's awesome. Fun fact about Mario Lemieux, when I was at Rob Morris, he lived down the road. So he was often at the rink, and I trained with his daughter quite a bit, like almost every day. And they're a pretty amazing family. Like, I don't know how they do it, but they're awesome.
Yeah, my family is part of my dad's side of the family is from Pittsburgh, so I'm a big Pittsburgh fan. And I'm biased here, but I still think Mario is the greatest of all time.
Yeah, he's awesome. But I love how you touched on, like, even in my young age, there was really no diabetes athletes. And to this day, I think I am the only professional women's hockey player, which
Wow.
I really hope that changes really soon, because I think like talking about the technology and healthcare and more we understand about diabetes, the more we are able to excel. And I think that's something that like initiatives like JDRF really helps out in researchers. So.
Well, I think you're being public and back in the day, I think there was also a lot of people hiding their diabetes and there wasn't social media or things of that nature. And I think having positive role models like you, a professional women's hockey player with T1D, or a Scott Verplank, or a Gary Hall, depending on what sport you're interested in, seeing that is so motivating. I'll just very quickly tell you a story that is one of my most powerful. I gave a talk here in New Jersey, and parents brought a lot of kids with T1D. And after my talk, one of the moms asked me to come and speak with her son. She said, he was just diagnosed last week. And I said, how are you doing? And the kid he was 13, and he started crying. And, he didn't want to be crying in front of me, and I felt terrible for him. And I said, oh, you're going to do well. Don't worry. It's not going to hold you back. I said, do you play any sports? And he said, yeah, I play soccer. And I said, did you know there's a T1D guy on the U.S. men's national team? And he looked and I said, he plays on the Seattle Sounders. He won the national championship at Stanford and was MVP. And it just changed his outlook like that. And I think what you do and the public athletes with T1D is so important to motivate kids and other adults with T1D.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And that's that visualization. And I don't know if you had a similar experience, but even when I was first diagnosed, just that verification that I can still play hockey, because hockey for me is my passion, my love. And throughout my life, I use it as a symbiotic relationship with my diabetes to stay healthy so I can play. And I was back on the ice for the week, and just hearing that, I think that's really empowering. What do you like better, running or hockey?
Hockey. Running is a weird thing for me because I do a lot of it. I've run 20 marathons. I've run an ultra. I still run many miles each week. And I enjoy it, but it's also painful. And when I'm doing it, I can't wait for it to be over. And whereas hockey, what's more fun than flying around the ice and scoring a good goal? And it's a group sport, and I'm a group type of person. So I certainly, I would say hockey.
I agree, but I'm biased. So this is Game Time with Anissa Gamble. In this period, we're talking with Aaron Kowalski about his research career. So the first thing, can you explain your research background and your credentials?
Sure. My research is I'm a molecular biologist. I did a Ph.D. in microbiology and molecular genetics at Rutgers here in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And that started my career. I was fortunate that my father was a scientist, so I always wanted to be a scientist, and I wanted to work in diabetes. My PhD was not in diabetes. It was really in protein biochemistry. But at the end of my studies, I saw a job opening for a scientist at JDRF. And it was focused on research and diabetes complications. And it seemed like the perfect fit for me. So I go back, my foundation is in molecular biology and biochemistry, but that opened the door to working in diabetes research.
That's one of the big things that I did growing up. I was just so fascinated with diabetes. And that's kind of why I'm still in the diabetes field, because in a selfish manner, I want to help out myself, but I just find it so incredible that, smallest amount of insulin causes such a cascade event.
Yeah, right.
It's crazy. So, so you kind of talked about looking at molecular genetics and protein biosynthesis, and then you went on to look at diabetes complications. Can you elaborate also what you used to kind of study? I mean, now that what you study, especially with like New England Journal of Medicine with continuous glucose monitors?
Yeah, so when I started at JDRF, we were focused on JDRF funds research in diabetes complications. And that's, if you break it down, we were funding research in kidney and eye and nerve disease, but also hypoglycemia. And a real kind of change in my career trajectory was kind of a fateful meeting in a good way. In 2004 in Philadelphia, where I was working with a group of researchers who were focused on diabetes technologies. And they were testing the Abbott Navigator, which was one of the first CGM devices. And I'll never forget, I came back to JDRF and I said, "You're not going to believe this. There's a continuous glucose monitor." And they're like, "Yeah, well, we don't do that. JDRF does, that's for companies to do." I said, "But our goal is to reduce hypoglycemia. This will reduce hypoglycemia." Well, long story short, that catalyzed what we called the JDRF Artificial Pancreas Project. And that project was kind of broken down into two main areas. One was continuous glucose monitors, and then the second was closing the loop, tying them to insulin pumps. We funded 5 research groups at the beginning, ended up being over $100 million in research and became a big global effort. We still work with Dr. Rebecca Leray in Montreal at McGill. And here we are today with hybrid closed loops on the market and CGMs on many people with diabetes, which is pretty cool.
It's so fascinating to me too about kind of like how fast technology has gone, and then also how big of an impact it has had in such a short amount of time.
My logic at the time was knowing human biology is very complicated and what's causing type 1 is very complicated. And it's not to say JDRF is giving up on curing T1D. That's still by far our number one priority. But I used to joke that we could send a man to the moon with a computer that's a fraction of the power of an iPhone. Why can't we use a computer to dose insulin?
Yeah.
And machines are easier than biology. So I thought that was a nearer term solution to keep people healthy until we got to biological solutions. And it turns out it was right.
At the end of my master's, I got to write and do this really cool article of like comparing the tortoise versus the hare, and the tortoise of, you know, the cure, whereas like the hare is technology that, you know, the cure will come, but it's going to take a while, and you need a lot of research efforts, and that's what something I loved about my master's of looking at islet transplantation, that it was so fascinating, and there's so much research efforts out there. But what can we help today? Even with that, you know, how did you transfer from like a basic science to like a clinical science application?
Yeah, I don't know. It wasn't, you know, I think it was this interesting, one of my strengths, I guess, is I'm by a heart, I guess, a problem solver. And I think that's one thing that when I talk to students, I had a number of students that trained with me in the lab, and I was a TA in grad school and taught that, well, really what you're teaching is solving problems. And of course you can focus on narrow things, but hopefully what you learn is to be able to tackle what's next, what's the next problem. And the other thing that I had, I think, in my back pocket was just my T1D experience. What is meaningful? What do people need? My brother, unfortunately, has a lot of hypoglycemia problems. He has hypoglycemia unawareness. I knew we needed some forewarning to people who are getting low. And that allowed me to work with these amazing people. I think that's another lesson for any scientist, is nobody can do it all. You fit your skills in with other really smart people. And what we did is create a pathway that ended up helping accelerate things. And I think one of my proud pieces that I added to the field, or we added to the field, I don't want to take full credit, but I'm proud of the role I played, was at the time, everybody was going for the perfect solution, a machine that looked like a pancreas or an islet. And what I said, and I published a paper way back, was, well, okay, that's fine, but that's hard. What if we did some steps along the way? And you'll still see this. It makes me chuckle because you'll see the JDRF, or the Kowalski roadmap. And it was such a simple concept, but nobody was doing it. And that led to the threshold suspend systems, the predictive low systems, and now the hybrid closed loops that are out on the market. Nobody was focused on that back then. But what it did was say, here is something that can make it through FDA, that'll be much safer, that's actually doable. And yeah, here we are. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Creating that pipeline, most certainly you can see how it accelerated things. So thank you so much for that.
Like you said, you know, it's a selfish pursuit, but it's also for I mean, like my brother and I, that's where I started, but now here at JDRF, I've met so many people with diabetes, and the goal is to help everybody.
Everyone's islet's the same, no matter who they are. What is it like studying diabetes while being a person living with diabetes?
Yeah, studying diabetes and living with it, that was one of the first questions I was asked when I interviewed at JDRF was, do you think you can be able to do this? And my response was, well, what am I going to do? Put my head in the sand? You know, I'm living this.
Yeah.
And if I can help use my scientific background and my understanding of some of the human side of living with the disease, I'll benefit, my brother will benefit, you know, more people will benefit. So there's no doubt there are days where it can be hard. You know, here we are in COVID, and some of the data on COVID and T1D is a little scary, and you see that and you're like, geez. Complications, of course, everybody's worried about complications, and you see research, I meet people. But I believe knowledge is power and that individuals can make a difference. And I want to lean in and help. So I've derived great satisfaction in being part of this community and feeling like I've made a little bit of a difference. That is much more than the downside of being like, God, this is such a grind. I don't want to think about it anymore.
Absolutely. Totally resonates. What do you predict that the future of diabetes is going to look like?
The future of diabetes, what will it look like? I personally believe that the work that you and Dr. Shapiro did, and Dr. Shapiro, I was fortunate to meet him about 2 years ago and talk about the funny aside. I don't know if you know this. He told me, which I didn't know, the very first trip he took on an airplane was from his JDRF fellowship.
Yeah.
And seeing his career and what we've learned with islet biology is I personally think that hybrid closed loops and devices are awesome. But this is a joke that I always make, but I think it's also an important point. There's nobody out there who doesn't have diabetes wearing an insulin pump. It's not like you go to the rink or go out for a run and see somebody wearing a pump and you say, hey, you have T1D? And they say, no, I'm just doing this for fun.
Yeah.
So we do it because it helps us and it's better. But the goal is to walk away from wearing devices. And islet transplantation showed that that's possible. So a big area of focus for us at JDRF is how do you make that possible for everybody? And I think stem cell therapy, stem cell derived islets, meeting the supply, because cadaveric islets are from people who have died and donated their organs, there's just not enough. And then the different new molecular approaches to protect them so you don't need immunosuppressants, these are now in human trials. Dr. Shapiro's running one of the trials with ViaCyte. They're at Harvard, they're doing gene-edited stem cells. In California, they're using a crazy science called mixed chimerism. I think the future is cell replacement. And I also think we're going to be able to stop T1D through preventative immunotherapies. And we just saw at the recent ADA scientific sessions that there's a drug called teplizumab that's delaying diabetes for years. So I think the biological side, the future is very bright. I know people are reticent to say when. We can't really predict. I'm not going to give a date because we don't know exactly the date, but I can tell you the science is making real tangible steps forward, and I'm excited about that.
Welcome back to Dskate's Game Time. Today we're talking with Aaron Kowalski about his career as the CEO and president of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, known as JDRF. So can you describe the process of becoming the president of JDRF?
Wow. Yeah. Becoming the president of JDRF, I have to pinch myself because my family started with JDRF back when the organization was JDF. Back in the 80s, we got involved and did a walk, and we used to get a magazine called Countdown Magazine, which I would read and hear about research advances. I mentioned in the second period that I started working in complications, and that started 2004. And worked my way to head up our research and advocacy programs. And our CEO, Derek Rapp, at the time, decided he wanted to move on to something different. And they put out a search, the board of JDRF. And I said, in my mind, I thought I was the best person for the job. I thought, I know diabetes, I know the community, I know the lay community, I know the scientific community, the companies. I'm well suited for this. And I threw my hat in the ring and talked to the board and made a case for why I think I thought I could do it. And I'm proud that I did, because I'm the first T1D person to run JDRF. International. And I never thought that I'd be sitting here in a COVID crisis during my first year, which has been stressful. But being at the helm of an amazing organization that's really, I am proud of the work that we're doing on research and policies to help people, because my brother and I have benefited, and I see a lot of people benefiting from the work we do.
Growing up with you and your brother, like, was there always in the back of your mind that, like, someday I'm going to be the president of JDRF?
I was always thinking that I would go be like more like my dad and work. My dad worked for Johnson & Johnson, and he was a scientist. I was really proud. In fact, on social media, I tweeted out last on Father's Day, he had a picture that was an illustration that his colleagues gave him, juggling all these different things, family, running. He was a runner, running, all this different stuff. And it's funny how you joke like you're going to become just like your parents. Well, it's like dead on, like I'm like my dad. But I was really proud of the work he did. He did sterilization science, making sure things that we use in medicine and pretty much everything are sterile. And that's what I thought I would be in, like a biotech company or something like that, or academia, and contribute as a scientist. When I got the job at JDRF, that was a different trajectory along that pathway. You know, going broader and having to run the business side of JDRF, I did not anticipate. But I'm happy I did it. I'm learning every day. I work with really smart people. And again, to me, it's all about the impact of the organization. I'm proud of the impact of the organization. You know, you have that incredible Canada affiliate. I have my map of America here, but I've been fortunate to travel all across Canada and the other parts of JDRF around the world. You know, JDRF is making a big impact across the globe.
And I love even just events, because it is a way to bring people together and talk about it. And it's more than just fundraising. You are the first president who lives with type 1. Do you feel like that opens the door for more, diverse or other people living with the disorder?
I think it's really important because so being the first president with T1D, and what does that really mean from a diversity of voice perspective? JDRF historically has been a parent-driven organization, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's my parents were amazing T1D champions. I give my mom and dad tremendous credit. The founding moms, I was very fortunate to know them very well. Lee Dskate and Carol Lurie from Philadelphia, New York. Helene Schiff in Canada. These parents changed the course of T1D. Now, where I think there's an important shift that needs to happen is it can't be just them. And people living with the disease need to lean in as well. When I talk to some adults with T1D, they'll say, well, I don't want to be defined by my type 1. And I often say, well, it's not just you. We carry genetic risk that we'll pass on to the next generation. It's about the next generation. It's about the people who don't have the resources that you may. So a big goal of mine is to get more T1Ders involved. I love that you guys are doing what you're doing. It shows the shift. It broadens what we're doing. Here in the States, we have these terrible racial gaps and inequities. We need to be more diverse and be more brown, and people of color need to be more represented. That's a big goal of mine. We have a great JDRF in Canada. We have a great JDRF here in the States. We have affiliates in Holland and Israel, in Australia. We need to be more global. JDRF funds research in 21 countries, but really we're not represented as a broad community in a tied together enough way. And I think having that background as a T1D person, I can talk the talk with people and understand where they're coming from and hopefully engage more people.
I love how you brought that up, because it totally is that co-design of working together. And just like research, it doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of gaps that we have, and we need to work together to, lessen that gap and move forward together. So I think that you yourself just saying that resonates, and it's a really great aspect of JDRF of trying to do that and heading in that direction. With JDRF too, can you just quickly talk about the research efforts you guys have, like the different categories?
The way we bucket research is our number one goal, our North Star is curing T1D. And I break curing, if you look at where we're going, is curing people with the disease and curing people who are at risk or will get the disease, which would be preventing it, really. To me, there are two main thrusts of that. It's replacing cells. I think cell replacement is a huge opportunity, or it's rebalancing the immune system. Both of those areas of research are making tremendous progress. So those are two big buckets: curing and preventing T1D, whether it's cell therapy or immunotherapies. Until we get there, we need to keep people healthy. So JDRF is focused on devices, the closed loop systems. We have been focused on other innovative ways that we might be able to help people. Like, one of the things that gets people excited, it's hard, but we are chipping away, is like a smart insulin. We still do fun complications research. Unfortunately, people still do get complications. And a new area of focus for us that I'm proud of is the psychosocial side of diabetes. We know that people with type 1, as positive as we are here, it's not always positive. There are rough patches. And for some people, there are very rough patches. Depression and anxiety and eating disorders. And that can make type 1 diabetes just an awful problem. So we do have some work in psychosocial parts of the disease. And all of that adds up to, how do we keep people healthy and ease some of the burden of diabetes management until we get to cures and prevention.
I love how you guys are going in the avenue of psychosocial, of diabetes distress and burnout, and even like that vehicle of digital technology. I'm really excited to see the upcoming years for that. If you're an average Joe, I don't know what JDRF is, what would you say to someone that they should donate or be involved within this organization?
So if I were to meet somebody on the street and try to talk about the value of JDRF, to me, it's the leading organization that's going to cure diabetes, and that impacts a lot of people. And I think that the other thing I would say is, you may not know type 1 diabetes, but you certainly know diabetes. And the other thing that we're learning is JDRF is a leader in just the science of autoimmunity and immunity. So we have a number of projects that are going beyond even diabetes into broader autoimmunity and even cancer research, believe it or not, because cancer is essentially a mirror of autoimmunity. So I think it's a leading organization that's grassroots, it's passionate about curing diabetes and helping a lot of other people along the way.
Thank you so much today, Aaron, for taking the time to talk to us. You're such an inspiration to not only the Dskate, but the entire diabetes community. And we admire so much of everything you're doing to help people living with diabetes. So thank you.
Well, thank you for all you do. You're an inspiration. I hope we can skate and pass the biscuit around sometime soon after we get out of this darn COVID crisis.
Be sure to follow Aaron and JDRF on your social media channels. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to Dskate for more sports and diabetes content. On behalf of the Dskate team, I'm Anissa. See you at the next pep drop.